Hello, Humane marketers. Sarah Znekrocha here. Welcome to another episode of the Humane Marketing Podcast, a place to be for the generation of marketers who cares. This is the show where we talk about marketing your business in a way that feels good to you, is aligned with your values, and also resonates more with your conscious customers because it's not pushy, ethical, and also beautiful. So if you're a regular here, you know that I'm organizing the conversations around the 7 Ps of humane marketing. And if you're new here and this is your first time, welcome. I'm so excited you're here. You may want to download your one-page marketing plan with the 7 Ps of humane marketing in the form of a mandala at humane.marketing/one page, the number 1 and page. So again, humane.marketing/one page. And with that, with no further ado, let's dive into today's conversation. Hi, Lian. So good to speak to you today. I'm so excited for our messy conversation.
Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. So the topic of today's conversation is really like sharing the mess. That's kind of what we thought we want to talk about. And when I did some research on this topic, and I think also you shared this phrase, carry the message, not the mess. That's kind of the commonly used phrase. When I did some research about this, a lot of the links on Google led me back to the AA movement, so Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was just kind of surprised or curious about it. I don't know enough about the 12 Steps program, but I'm just curious from you to hear, is that also where you think this phrase came from? Or is there another place where this emerged, this message or this phrase, carry the message, not the mess?
Where I heard it was during multiple programs on visibility, online marketing, messaging. The expert or the coach would always say, like, share the message, not the mess. And they often would refer to like this is originated from the AA meetings. Okay. To be honest, I never researched it. So I think it has become this rule to how to show up in the online space in a way. So that's where I came familiar with the term, but I couldn't tell you anything about the 12-step program either.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because it really shows, as we're going to go into kind of this maybe a bit outdated way of showing up in the online space, or at least according to us, because we're going to kind of discuss that maybe the opposite may also be true. So actually, share the mess, not just the message. To me, it's almost like when I think of mess and message, it's like an iceberg. Usually you have the message, that's the tip of the iceberg, but then there's the whole mess, which is the bottom that's covered up by water, but it's still there. So that's what we're gonna get into. So maybe you could share with our listeners kind of like the reason, or what made you contact me about being a guest on this topic.
Yeah, I've been following you for a while because your topic, your revolution, really interests me. And one of your emails around your rebranding process really spoke to me. And then especially the part where you were explaining to us that you were taking us along on your journey of the whole rebranding, and that you were giving yourself permission to be imperfect in this transition and to also share the messiness behind the scenes. And I think that part really spoke to me because I think it's not talked about enough, that we should have more conversations about the importance of sharing the mess as well. Because like you gave the example of the iceberg, we often only show the iceberg above the waterline, right? And what's underneath, we keep it hidden away. So yeah, really
Yeah,
to
it's
have
this
this calm.
perfect image that, we're like, oh, we made it and we're perfect human beings and that's what we want to show. And in a way, yeah, it really made me reflect on when I saw that was potentially, and maybe a listener can correct us if we're wrong, but this is potentially coming from the AA meetings. It really made me wonder, well, how is that a good thing that you're, teaching this in these 12-step programs, that you should only share the message and not the mess. It just got me wondering, because as in this recovery process, well, a lot of recovery is probably messy, and it's part of that healing process in a way. So I think even there, I think maybe there needs to be a revolution as well, and say, well, actually, the mess is part of the healing. And so it's not just about the message, but also about the mess. Anyways, it got me thinking about that. So you work with people, or mainly women, in transition. And so tell us how this messiness kind of has to do also with the work you do, and how you kind of step up and help people be more confident about also sharing the mess.
Yeah, I think speaking to the part where you mentioned a revolution was needed in like the AA space, but also maybe the whole mental health space, it's very true that professionals are taught to be about disclosure and not disclosing too much of your personal side. And I think that's also where it's coming from. So I just wanted to comment on that before I answer your question, that I really think that this revolution is needed there as well, to bring back more humanness in the mental health space. But to answer your question, I think we have been raised with a very linear way of thinking about our careers, about our lives in general, maybe even. And that is also what gets a lot of people stuck in when they feel stuck in their career and not know how to move forward. It's because they get stuck in this linear way of thinking where there's no room for the messiness. So it's kind of like you go to school, then you go off to college, you pick your major, and then you pick a job, and that's it. And then you get a family and a house, etc. And in that whole narrative, there's no room for the multi-passionate who likes to do multiple things because he or she has picked one major and has to like figure it out within that industry, or someone who just wants to transition from one industry to another industry just because interest switched. So I work with a lot of people who are in that space, who feel stuck in this linear path. And because we get a lot of pictures of this ideal ways of what success should look like and what careers should look like, I think that is really difficult for people then to find their own ways if they deviate from this ideal picture.
Yeah, I remember it reminds me of, in my LinkedIn consulting business, I sometimes teach at big schools like MBA programs and so on. And one of the questions is always, well, how do I pivot? What if, I have all this experience in this area, and how do I, write my profile, or how do I appeal to employers if I want to change to a completely different area in business or in industry? And it's true that people are completely stuck with thinking that's it. That's what I have to now be in this industry or sector for the rest of my life. And so I always tell them that it's all about the transferable skills. You need to not so much be focused on the hats you are wearing, but more like what are oftentimes it's also the soft skills that need to be highlighted more, and not just like, oh, these are the job titles I had and now I'm stuck with those things. So I think it's a really big topic, this linear thinking. You're completely right. And so what are some of the conditioning, do you think, that comes with that thinking in terms of, I'm thinking, about the messiness. So like, how are we conditioned from society to behave in a certain way, or appear in a certain way online, or in, I'm thinking job interviews and so on.
I think we're very conditioned to think that messiness is a reflection of our shortcoming, or in any way like devaluing us.
Mm-hmm.
And especially in the professional space. And I think the pandemic has changed it since we've been working from home a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really like you have this separate segregation from home and work. And everything that happens at home in your private life should stay there. And it's unprofessional to show that in your work. And at the workplace, I believe that if you can bring your whole human being to the workplace, including those parts from your private life that also impact your whole way of working, and the results that you can produce, that's very important. So I think that with what I mentioned, this conditioning that messiness equals unprofessional or unworthy or shortcomings, I think that's mainly the core issue or stigma that needs to be addressed and changed, in my opinion. Yeah,
you're so right. And we do see small signs that it's already has been changing, and definitely over the pandemic, right? Things are much more blurry now between, the lines are not as clear anymore. I remember, 10 years when I started out with LinkedIn, and I was telling people you need to show more of the human side. And the main comment I always got, but this is not Facebook, this is LinkedIn, it's professional. And then, a few years ago, the millennials came into LinkedIn, and they're like, well, what's with this stiff kind of platform? It feels like a chamber of commerce meeting. And so they really started to bring in more of their human aspects. And yes, maybe some kind of went a bit overboard, but in the end, now we're seeing a complete different platform than what it was before the millennials came in. So you mentioned mental health, and it was just Mental Health Day a couple of days before we were doing this recording on October 10th. And I did see quite a few very vulnerable posts in my LinkedIn feed. Do you think that is to just stay still a taboo, or will this become something also that is more openly discussed? Like the fact that people show up and post on their LinkedIn feed that they're dealing with something that shows a lot of bravery, in my opinion.
Yeah, I also noticed the more openly conversations about mental health, and especially on LinkedIn, this is very noticeable.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the taboo still exists, because I also see a lot of stereotypical language around mental health, and especially around mental illness. And I think that having the open conversation is important in the first place, but in addition to that, we also need to be more educated around what is mental health, what is it not. So like debunking all the myths around mental health and mental illness, because the stigma and the taboo originates from fear of, I think, not understanding what it's about. And at least in the Netherlands, we don't get educated on that at all. Maybe now things have changed, like I went to school a long time ago, but in my time that I went to school, there was little attention for mental health and just proper education.
Believe me, there still isn't. My teenagers, I know what they're learning at school, and they discuss it more between them, but it's not a topic that's being brought up by the school. So to me, not much has changed, unfortunately, from the school system. Luckily, young people are just more aware, and they will, address it between them. But yeah, unfortunately, it's still a topic. You're right. That's where it should start. Even before, we address it in companies, it's the school systems that also have to adapt to that. So true. Yeah. I think another thing we maybe have been conditioned in a way is and now I'm thinking more about business as well, is this idea of the hero's journey. You hear that in a lot of marketing programs and in storytelling and stuff like that, where there's this kind of framework, I guess, that is the hero's story arc, where you start from a very bad place and then you overcome something and now you're the self-made millionaire who's made it. And where I agree that makes good movies, I just think it's also starting to be probably a bit outdated. People are, at least my kind of people, are bored of those stories. It's like, it's so predictable. It's like, oh yeah, you're going to share something, that you've overcome and now you're this perfect human being. What do you think has, changed, and why are those stories maybe not so much appealing anymore to people today?
Yeah, I think it's mainly because it's just a one-size-fits-all story in a way. And I think our human experience don't come in this 12-step framework. And when we try to distill our experiences into a framework, we lose the humanness in it and it's not relatable anymore. And we filter out the aspects that do not fit in the framework, which could be very valuable to the story. So this is like the messy parts that we kind of filter out. And I think also because we have a lot of more awareness about diversity, and this hero's journey is really the story of this one individual, that's heroic person that's beating the evil and getting to this successful place. Whereas I think that we're more moving towards also the collective journey, like we as a society together in community work towards successes rather than just this one heroic person. It's very individualistic approach to change. And yeah, I think the awareness around diversity has really made us.
I love that. Yeah, I love that so much. You really brought this to my attention. I guess also why, to me, it was just like, felt so pathetic. It's like, oh, good for you.
Yeah.
and it actually did the opposite for me. It didn't make me connect more with this person. It kind of almost made a distance between us, because I felt like, oh, good for you, you're now the self-made millionaire, but I'm still here struggling. And so it didn't create this connection, where if I hear a story where someone is sharing more of the mess, I feel like, oh, we're kind of going through our own stuff, and we're both being human, and you have some more success in this area, but you're still struggling with this. And it just feels like you're connecting more on that really human level. So yeah, thanks so much for sharing that. I hadn't really thought about the individualistic approach, where it's like, yeah, we're not really like moving towards a common goal as a society. You're just sharing your own, often it is money related story, right? So it's like, yawn, move on.
Yeah, exactly. And it sets the wrong expectations, I think, as well, because it really has this happy ending as always. And yeah, sometimes
it's a typical movie, and those movies are fun to watch. Like Slumdog Millionaire comes to mind for me. They're fun to watch as a movie, but as a story to connect with, it's not really, it doesn't give you that human vibe at all. Yeah. So in a way, it's almost like, do you think that the pandemic has kind of increased our tolerance with messiness? if you think about how these lines between personal and work have blurred out, do you think even on, the employer side, maybe there's a bit more tolerance for the personal messiness?
Yeah, I've heard a lot of stories where managers and leaders were much more tolerant towards blending in the private and the work life.
Mhm.
But I think it's dependent on the person who was leading, because there are also stories of managers who still were very in this box thinking of, didn't want to adjust their perspective on it.
Right.
But I think in my coaching practice, a lot of clients spoke about how they felt more able to be more compassionate towards themselves and the mess that they were in, because we were all in the same mess, right? And we couldn't escape the mess because we're locked in our houses. So I really do think there's a shift, and there's also this concept of post-traumatic growth. And I think, meaning that there can also be positive impact from traumatic experiences, or messy experiences in this case. And I think that's also very much the case when I speak with clients who, like, we started out the trajectory before the pandemic, and they were like, we were talking about being more kind to yourself, being more compassionate, thinking, reflecting for yourself, what are my values, what is important to me. And then, like, during the pandemic, they mentioned during the sessions, like, and now it clicked for me. Now I understand what we were talking about. So yeah, I think that's also a positive shift that has come out of everything that's happened the past 2 years.
Yeah, really just a kind of a letting go. And I talk about, taking off the mask. That's what it really feels like to me a lot of times still in this business world, and big corporations or even smaller organization, where every time you put on the business mask, and then you're like, finally I can take it off, and now I can be human. Well, how unhealthy is that, and how stressful is that? So I'm so glad that we're moving towards something new, something fresh, and yeah, it might take some time, but maybe less than we think, because as we said before, it doesn't necessarily have to be a linear movement. It can be like, leaps in in that direction. So yeah, I'm excited for that. Another thing that maybe we often hear is that we should share the mess once we've already processed it, and not while we're living it. What's your opinion on that? How raw can it really be? Or how healthy is it to maybe process it first and then share it?
I think it's very contextual. I think it depends per situation, because I think it can be very helpful that you share the mess while you're in the midst of it, like while you're still processing, but only with the right people in the right place and with the right intentions. Because it can also go the opposite way, and when you share too much in the wrong place with the wrong people, it can be harmful, not only for yourself, but also for example, in the online space, for the audience that you're communicating with. So I think it's very important. And for what I apply for myself is always having to check in with myself and with my audience before I share anything, when I'm still in the process of any development that I'm going through, and really checking in with my intentions. So why am I sharing? Why am I willing to share this? So what is my intention? What am I trying to accomplish? And if I sense for myself, like I'm looking for validation in any way, that it's for me, it's like this boundary, like, okay, maybe share with my boyfriend and talk through with him, but not with like social media audience. And also, I think checking in with the space itself, like, is this the space where I feel comfortable sharing? And can I deal with the consequences that may be a result of that? And checking in with your audience is maybe a bit more difficult when you're sharing online. When we're talking about the online space, you cannot really read the room. So really trying to put yourself in the shoes of your audience and see how can this be helpful for them. I think those are the criteria, at least for myself, that I'm using to really decide, like, am I sharing this, or is this something that I shouldn't share for now and maybe later after I've processed it a bit more.
Yeah, I love that. I love this kind of testing first. Am I just looking for validation? Am I just looking for kind of confirmation that I'm really suffering? This victim mode, in a way, is like often pushes us to have other people confirm and say, yeah, it's really bad what you're going through. But yeah, then really decide, well, is this a good thing to share it online, or is this better maybe that I share it first with family and friends and get confirmation from there, from people who can really support me? Because let's face it, in the online world, you're not gonna get the same support as from close friends. So I like this kind of processing first. And it's true that in some occasions probably it might help to share it. I think it's also very personal, like how you are personally wired and how you process your feelings and hurt and those kind of things. Like, I know for myself, first I need to just shut everything off and just kind of be with it before I can go out there and share it publicly. So for my rebrand, it took me 2 months to digest first what happened before I could go out and say, okay, I pulled myself together and now I can share really from a space, not from this a space of, yes, I'm being a victim, but saying, yes, this was hard, it sucked, but here is what I'm gonna do going forward. So again, it's this fine line between saying, oh, look at me, I'm perfect because I now have a plan, and saying, look at me, I'm really deep in my mess. So it's finding this balance. In the Marketing Like We're Human book, I share this visual of a pool and say that you can go in at the shallow end, or you can go in and jump into the deep end. And that's really where you need to see how ready your audience is to go in at the deep end with you. And sometimes really this can be shocking to whoever you're talking to. So really you need to kind of use your common sense. And like you said, in the online space, you can't read the room. So use common sense and don't jump in the deep end if people are just not ready for it. But it's not easy. I think we both agree that it's kind of, maybe you screw up a couple of times and then you know better next time.
Yeah, it's really about this setting boundaries for yourself and being intentional, I think.
Yeah. So maybe just to kind of come to a full circle here, in a way, we're still saying share more of your mess. Why do we encourage people to share more of their mess?
I think when we leave out the messy parts, we leave out part of our humanness. And I think that's so important for true human connection. So when you, either if you apply it to marketing, but also in a job interview, we talked about the hero's journey, and that it can also be like this way, in a way, working against establishing a connection. I think adding the mess to your story helps to foster this connection, but then also with intentionality. And especially in the online marketing as online marketers or business owners who are doing the marketing for their services, I think we have this responsibility of this image that we create, because we're very intentional and strategic about the picture that we want to paint for our audience that helps us sell our services. But I think that we also should be intentional about to what extent are we showing the truth and the real picture, and am I leaving out elements in the story that are very important to picture the complete story, that I'm leaving out just because I think that is not contributing to the ideal picture perfect image that I want to create. So I think that's the main reason, for me at least, that we share more of the mess in our stories.
Yeah, so true that once we actually meet the human behind, the facade, the perfect business, we're not like, whoa, this is way different from the picture that you've painted for me in your online presence. Or maybe in the past, maybe you did get onto a call with this person and then it still felt not human. It still felt like you're talking to the online presence person, but you're not really talking to the human behind the business. And that, I think, I still see a lot out there, that we have this pressure to be this person, be this perfect online business owner, and show up as that even when we have conversations with our clients. And I think there still needs to be a shift in how we just show up in a way more human way. So Lian, tell us what kind of mess you're in right now.
Oh, well, do you have a minute? You wanted to round off. We are currently renovating in our apartment, so I'm in a literal mess because we are in a temporary home. That's the biggest mess that anyone can imagine. So I think that's the literal mess. And in business-wise, I kind of going through a phase that I'm multi-passionate myself, and my brain goes all the places, like chase this project and then this project, and I find it very difficult now to find this focus. So that's kind of the mess in my head, and yeah, that's something that I'm dealing with for the last quarter of this year. And then there's, of course, just life, other messes in life, but I think given the time.
Thanks so much for being transparent. I think September for me was just like the messiest month ever. Nothing worked the way I wanted it to. It felt like there was just like this big heavy blanket on us, maybe us all, I don't know. It felt it was just like me. So yeah, I'm today I feel like, oh, the mess is kind of under control, but these things also come in waves, right? And then, like you say, life happens, things happen, personal things happen, and you just get completely off track, and then hopefully find your way back. So yeah. This has been really good. Thank you so much for being so vulnerable and open to talk about mess and the messy stuff. Tell us, where can people find out more about you and how it is to work with you?
I think the best way to find me is by looking up my name on LinkedIn. Either connect with me there or on Instagram. I'm also on my website. Yeah, I'm not sure if I cannot spell out my name. Well, I can, but I don't.
We'll link it in the show notes.
Yeah. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, on my website, where I'm sharing more career-related content and content related to vulnerability and sharing the mess, like this podcast. And lastly, if you want interested in career coaching, you can also go over to my website and find more information about that there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I always ask one last question, and that is, what are you grateful for today or this week, Lian?
I'm very grateful for the internet, because I think it enabled me to connect on a global level with so many inspiring people. So that's something I'm very grateful for.
Talking about September, we had one day with no internet.
Right.
Like, oh my gosh. Yeah. You forget how, you take everything for granted, and then you don't have it. And you're like, I couldn't be in business if it wasn't for the internet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time and being on the Humane Marketing Podcast. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for watching and being part of a generation of marketers who cares for yourself, for your clients, and for the planet. We really are change makers before we are marketers. So go ahead, be the change you want to see in the world. And I hope to see you again next week. Take care.